The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of Mel's Diner, a weathered roadside establishment that had seen better decades. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting an orange glow across the wet pavement where a modest tour bus sat parked, its engine cooling after miles of highway travel. Inside, the familiar sounds of clinking plates and muffled conversations created a symphony of ordinary life, punctuated by the occasional hiss of the coffee machine and the gentle scrape of worn silverware against ceramic plates. At a corner booth near the back, an elderly man sat alone, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. His grey hair fell in unruly waves beneath a well-worn baseball cap, and his clothes spoke of comfort rather than fashion. A faded flannel shirt, dark jeans that had seen countless washings, and scuffed boots that had walked many miles. To any casual observer, he might have been a retired farmer, a traveling salesman, or simply another soul seeking refuge from the storm. But beneath those tired eyes lay decades of stories, melodies that had shaped generations, and a voice that had become the soundtrack to America's conscience. Bob Dylan had been traveling for 3 days, moving from city to city, venue to venue, carrying with him the weight of a lifetime spent translating human experience into song. Tonight's concert in the next town over would be his last for several weeks, and the prospect of rest felt both foreign and necessary. The constant motion, the endless faces in crowds, the hotel rooms that all looked the same, it all blurred together after so many years on the road. Sometimes, in moments like this, sitting in an anonymous diner while rain painted streaks down the windows, he felt most himself. The waitress approached his table with practiced efficiency, her name tag reading Sarah in simple black letters. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that held a mixture of weariness and determination. Her uniform was clean, but showed the signs of a long shift, a small stain near the pocket, wrinkles that spoke of constant movement, shoes that had walked countless miles across linoleum floors. There was something in her bearing that suggested this job was not a choice, but a necessity, a means to an end that might never come. "More coffee?" she asked, her voice carrying the flat efficiency of someone who had asked the same question thousands of times. She barely glanced at Dylan as she spoke, her attention already shifting to the next table, the next order, the next small demand in an endless succession of small demands. Dylan nodded, watching as she poured the dark liquid with mechanical precision. "Been working here long?" he asked, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp that had become as recognizable as any instrument. Sarah paused for just a moment, her eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. "Long enough," she replied, a hint of something, frustration perhaps, or resignation, creeping into her tone. "You passing through? Or are you one of those guys who think small-town diners are quaint?" There was an edge to her words, a defensiveness that spoke of too many encounters with condescending travelers who saw places like this as curiosities rather than realities where real people worked real jobs for real money that barely covered real bills. Dylan recognized the protective wall she had built, the way she preemptively dismissed anyone who might look down on her circumstances. "Just passing through," he said simply. "Sometimes the road gets long, and you need to sit somewhere that feels honest." For a moment, something shifted in Sarah's expression. The mask of professional detachment flickered, revealing a glimpse of the person beneath the uniform. "Honest," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yeah, I suppose this place is that. Nothing fancy, nothing fake, just coffee, food, and people trying to get through another day." As she moved away to serve other customers, Dylan found himself watching her interactions with the other patrons. A businessman in an expensive suit snapped his fingers to get her attention, then complained loudly when his eggs weren't prepared exactly to his specifications. A group of teenagers made a mess of their table, leaving ketchup smears and crumpled napkins scattered across the surface, then walked out without leaving a tip. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure, cleaning up after each customer with quiet dignity, absorbing their casual disrespect like a sponge absorbs water. Dylan had seen this pattern countless times in his travels across America, hard-working people serving others who barely acknowledged their humanity, invisible labor performed by invisible people in the machinery of daily life. It was a theme that had run through his music for decades, this divide between the powerful and the powerless, the seen and the unseen, the heard and the silent. The dinner rush was beginning to wind down when Dylan noticed Sarah taking her break in a small alcove near the kitchen. She sat with her back to the dining room, her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, staring down at something in her hands. Curiosity drew him from his booth, and as he approached, he saw that she was holding a worn notebook, its pages filled with handwritten text. Even from a distance, he could see the careful arrangement of words, the crossed-out lines and scribbled corrections that marked the work of someone crafting something with care and intention. "Sorry to intrude," Dylan said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I couldn't help but notice. Are those song lyrics?" Sarah's head snapped up, her hands instinctively closing the notebook against her chest. A flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks. "It's nothing," she said quickly, "just foolishness. Something to pass the time." But Dylan had caught a glimpse of the pages, seen enough to recognize the structure of verses and choruses, the careful placement of words that spoke of someone who understood rhythm and rhyme, melody and meaning. "Mind if I sit?" He asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Sarah hesitated, glancing around the diner to make sure her supervisor wasn't watching. "I don't really have much time," she said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she wanted the company, wanted someone to acknowledge what she had been working on in the margins of her exhausting days. Dylan sat down anyway, his presence somehow both unassuming and commanding. "I've been writing songs for more years than I care to count," he said, his voice gentle. "I know that look, the one you get when words are fighting to come out, when melody is knocking around inside your head like a bird trying to escape a cage." Sarah's grip on the notebook loosened slightly. "You write songs?" she asked, skepticism and curiosity warring in her voice. "I try to," Dylan replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Some turn out better than others. What about you? How long have you been writing?" The question seemed to unlock something in Sarah. She looked down at the notebook in her hands, and Dylan could see years of accumulated dreams and deferred hopes in that simple gesture. "Since I was a kid," she admitted quietly. "My mother used to say I was born humming. She'd find me in my room, making up songs about anything, the neighbor's cat, the way rain sounded on our roof, the smell of bread baking." She paused, and Dylan waited, sensing that she was deciding whether to trust him with something precious and fragile. "I wanted to go to Nashville," she continued, her voice growing stronger as the memories took hold. "Had it all planned out when I graduated high school. Was going to Waitress during the day and play the honky-tonks at night, work my way up like all the stories you hear, but then..." Her voice trailed off, and Dylan could fill in the blanks. Family obligations, financial pressures, life happening while dreams waited. It was the same story he had heard in 100 different variations across the years. "But then life got complicated," he offered gently. Sarah nodded. "My father got sick, needed someone to take care of him. Mum was already gone by then. So I stayed, took this job, told myself it would just be for a year or two. That was 23 years ago." The weight of those lost years hung in the air between them. Dylan understood that kind of sacrifice, though his own path had led in the opposite direction, away from home, away from conventional expectations, toward the uncertain life of a traveling musician. He wondered sometimes what songs might have been written by people like Sarah, voices that never got the chance to be heard, melodies that never found their way out of notebooks and into the world. "Your father?" Dylan asked softly. "Died 5 years ago," Sarah said, her voice matter-of-fact but not cold. "By then, I'd been out of the music scene for so long, I didn't even know where to start. The industry had changed. Everything was different. I was middle-aged, working at a diner in a town nobody's ever heard of. Not exactly music row material. Dylan studied her face, seeing not just the resignation, but also the ember of hope that still glowed beneath the ashes of deferred dreams. Would you mind if I looked at what you've been working on? He asked. Sarah's grip tightened on the notebook again. I don't know. I mean, they're not professional or anything. Just words I put together when I can't sleep. Melodies I hum while I'm cleaning tables. They probably don't make sense to anyone but me. The best songs usually start that way, Dylan assured her. Personal truth that somehow becomes universal. The songs that matter most are the ones that have to come out, whether anyone's listening or not. After a long moment of internal debate, Sarah slowly opened the notebook and turned it toward him. The page she revealed was titled Highway Ghosts. And even before Dylan began reading, he could sense the careful craftsmanship in the way the words were arranged, the consciousness of rhythm and flow that marked someone who understood song structure intuitively. The lyrics spoke of dreams deferred and responsibilities accepted, of nights spent watching headlights pass on distant highways while wondering about the lives of the people behind them. There was a haunting quality to the imagery, a sense of lives unlived and paths not taken, but also a quiet strength in the acceptance of duty and the finding of dignity in service to others. Dylan read in silence, his appreciation growing with each verse. This wasn't the work of an amateur dabbling in rhyme. This was genuine songcraft, born from genuine experience and genuine emotion. The metaphors were fresh without being forced, the rhythm natural without being predictable. Most importantly, there was truth in every line, the kind of authentic voice that record executives spent millions trying to manufacture but could never quite capture. Sarah, he said finally, looking up from the notebook, this is remarkable, really, truly remarkable. She searched his face for signs of politeness or pity, but found neither. You really think so? She asked, vulnerability clear in her voice. I know so, Dylan replied firmly. This song, it's got something that can't be taught or faked. It's got truth, and truth is what makes music matter, what makes it last. Across the diner, Sarah's supervisor was gesturing for her to return to work. Her break was over, and there were still tables to clean, orders to take, coffee to pour. But something had shifted in her posture, in the way she held herself. For the first time in years, someone had seen her work, had recognized the music in her words, had validated the creative fire that she had kept burning in secret for so long. I should get back, she said, closing the notebook and tucking it into her apron pocket. Wait, Dylan said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a worn business card and wrote something on the back. If you ever decide you want to take another shot at Nashville, give this person a call. Tell her Bob sent you. Sarah took the card and glanced at it, but in the dim light of the alcove, she couldn't make out the details. Bob? She asked. That's me, Dylan said, standing up from the table. And Sarah, don't let anyone tell you it's too late. I've seen plenty of people half your age with twice your opportunities who couldn't write one line with the honesty I just read. Music isn't about age or timing. It's about having something real to say and the courage to say it. As Sarah returned to her duties, Dylan settled back into his booth, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the countless talented people he had encountered over the years, individuals whose creativity had been buried under the weight of circumstance and obligation. How many Sarahs were out there, serving coffee and cleaning tables while carrying symphonies in their hearts? How many voices had been silenced not by lack of talent, but by lack of opportunity? The rain had stopped by the time Dylan finished his coffee, but he found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about this place, about Sarah's story, that had stirred something in him. A reminder of why he had started writing songs in the first place, back when music was about connection rather than commerce, when a song was a way to reach across the void between human beings and say, "You're not alone, Mum." As the evening wore on and the last of the dinner customers departed, Dylan remained at his booth, occasionally ordering another coffee just to have an excuse to talk with Sarah. Each interaction revealed another facet of her personality, her dry humor, her genuine concern for the regular customers she had been serving for years, her encyclopedic knowledge of the town's history and gossip. She was clearly intelligent, articulate, and observant, qualities that shone through despite her humble circumstances. "You know," Sarah said during one of her passes by his table, "you're the first customer in months who's actually looked at me. I mean, really looked when I'm talking. Most people, they see the uniform and they stop seeing the person. You're either very polite or very lonely." Dylan chuckled. "Maybe a little of both," he admitted. "I spend a lot of time around people, but not much time actually with people, if you know what I mean." "The traveling life?" Sarah nodded knowingly. "What kind of work keeps you on the road so much?" "Music," Dylan said simply. "Oh, you're in a band?" Sarah's interest was genuine, not the feigned enthusiasm she might have shown to a younger customer bragging about his garage band exploits. "Something like that," Dylan replied, not out of false modesty, but because he had long since learned that revealing his identity often changed the nature of conversations in ways that weren't always helpful. People began performing for him instead of being themselves, or they became so starstruck that genuine communication became impossible. As the clock on the wall approached 10, Sarah began her closing duties, wiping down tables, stacking chairs, refilling salt shakers, and preparing the register for the night shift. Dylan watched her work with the same careful attention he had observed earlier, noting the way she took pride in leaving everything clean and organized for whoever would open the next morning. "Looks like we're closing up," she said as she approached his table one final time. Dylan nodded, leaving money for his coffee along with a generous tip. As he stood to leave, Sarah stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for listening, for taking the time. It's been the most interesting conversation I've had in years." "Thank you for sharing your work," Dylan replied. "And remember what I said about that call. Some opportunities are worth taking, even when they scare us." Dylan walked out into the cool night air, leaving Sarah to finish her closing duties. The parking lot was mostly empty now, except for Sarah's aging Honda and the tour bus, where his band members were probably asleep or playing cards. But instead of heading directly to the bus, Dylan found himself walking around to the side of the building, where a small employee entrance led to a narrow alley. He wasn't sure why he waited, only that something felt unfinished, as if the evening's conversation had opened a door that shouldn't be left standing ajar. Through the window, he could see Sarah moving through her final tasks with practiced efficiency, her notebook visible in her apron pocket like a talisman of possibility. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the employee entrance, keys in hand, looking tired but somehow lighter than when Dylan had first seen her. She was surprised to find him waiting by her car. "Is everything okay?" she asked, concern replacing surprise. "I wanted to ask you something," Dylan said, his voice carrying an unusual note of urgency. "Tomorrow night, my band is playing at the Civic Center in the next town over. It's not a big venue, maybe 1,200 seats. Would you consider coming? As my guest?" Sarah's first instinct was to decline. She worked most nights, rarely went out, and certainly didn't attend concerts by bands she had never heard of. But there was something in Dylan's manner that made her pause, something that suggested this invitation meant more than simple politeness. "I don't really know your music," she said honestly. "That's okay," Dylan replied. "Maybe you'll recognize a song or two, and if not, well, you'll get to see what it looks like when someone else's dreams came true. Sometimes that can be inspiring, even if the music isn't your style." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah nodded. "Okay," she said, "but I'll pay for my own ticket." Dylan smiled. "Already taken care of. There'll be a ticket waiting at will call under your name. And Sarah, bring the notebook." Before she could ask what he meant by that, Dylan had disappeared into the shadows beside the building, leaving Sarah standing alone in the parking lot with more questions than answers, and the strange feeling that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. The next evening found Sarah standing in front of her bedroom closet, faced with the unprecedented challenge of choosing what to wear to a concert. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of work uniforms, casual clothes for her days off, and a few pieces suitable for church or family gatherings, none of which seemed appropriate for whatever kind of musical performance awaited her. She had spent most of the day thinking about her conversation with Bob, replaying their exchange and wondering about his invitation. There had been something almost familiar about him, though she was certain they had never met before. Maybe it was just the way he had listened, the quality of attention he had brought to their conversation that reminded her of someone from her past. A teacher, perhaps, or a family friend who had taken her seriously when others had dismissed her interests as childish fantasies. Eventually, Sarah settled on a simple black dress and boots, clothes that could work for either a casual or formal setting. She slipped the notebook into her purse, still uncertain why Bob had specifically asked her to bring it, but unwilling to ignore the request. As she drove the 30 miles to the Civic Center, she found herself humming some of the melodies she had been working on, surprised by how natural it felt to give them voice after so many years of keeping them locked in silence. The Civic Center was busier than Sarah had expected, with people of all ages streaming toward the entrance. The crowd was notably older than what she might have expected for a typical concert. Many appeared to be in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, dressed in everything from casual jeans to evening wear. There was an atmosphere of anticipation that felt different from the few concerts Sarah had attended in her youth, more reverent somehow, as if the audience was gathering for something more than entertainment. At the will call window, Sarah gave her name and was surprised to be handed not just a ticket, but an envelope marked VIP Guest. Inside, along with her ticket, was a note written in Bob's careful handwriting. "Sarah, thanks for coming. After the show, someone will come find you and bring you backstage, if you're interested. No pressure, but I'd like you to meet some people who might appreciate your work. Bob." Sarah's ticket was for the 3rd row, center section, better seats than she had occupied at any event in her life. As she settled in, she studied the program and felt a jolt of recognition that sent electricity through her entire body. The headliner was Bob Dylan, and staring back at her from the program's cover was a photograph of the man who had sat in her booth the night before, drinking coffee and reading her songs. The realization hit her in waves. Bob Dylan, the Bob Dylan, had been in her diner, had listened to her complaints about difficult customers and the endless routine of her work life, had read her amateur lyrics and offered encouragement, had somehow seen past her uniform and her circumstances to recognize something worth nurturing. As the house lights dimmed and Dylan took the stage with his band, Sarah felt as if she were watching from inside a dream. This was the voice that had provided the soundtrack to her youth, the songs that had played on her radio during those long-ago nights when she had imagined herself on stage, sharing her own music with the world. Songs like "Blowin' in the Wind" and "The Times They Are A-Changin' had shaped her understanding of what music could be, not just entertainment, but commentary, not just melody, but message. Dylan's performance was masterful, spanning decades of material and demonstrating why he had remained relevant across generations of changing musical tastes. But for Sarah, the most powerful moment came when he introduced a song she didn't recognize, something that seemed newer than his classic material. "This next song," Dylan said, his voice carrying clearly through the intimate venue, "is about the people we meet along the way, who remind us why we started making music in the first place. It's about the voices that never got heard and the dreams that got deferred but never died." As he began to play, Sarah realized with shock that some of the imagery in the song echoed themes from her own writing: highway ghosts, deferred dreams, the dignity of service, the weight of responsibility. It wasn't her song, but it felt connected to their conversation, as if Dylan had taken their brief interaction and transformed it into something universal, something that spoke to anyone who had ever wondered about the path not taken. After the show, as the audience filed out amid enthusiastic applause and calls for encore, a young woman approached Sarah's seat. "Sarah?" she asked politely. "I'm Jenny, Bob's tour manager. He asked me to see if you'd like to come backstage for a few minutes." Sarah followed Jenny through a maze of corridors that led behind the stage, where the atmosphere was a mixture of celebration and efficient breakdown as crew members began packing equipment. Dylan was standing near a small table laden with bottled water and towels, still radiating the energy of performance, but already beginning to decompress from the intensity of being on stage. "Sarah," he called when he saw her approaching. "You made it. What did you think?" "I think," Sarah said, still processing everything she had experienced, "that I should have recognized you last night. I mean, your voice. I've been listening to your music for 30 years. Dylan waved away the implied apology. "Recognition changes things," he said. "Changes how people talk, what they're willing to share. I liked our conversation the way it was. Two people talking about music, about dreams, about the things that matter. That's rare." "That song," Sarah said, "the one you introduced as being about people you meet along the way, did that really come from our conversation?" "Partly," Dylan admitted. "Your notebook, your story, the way you talked about highway ghosts and watching other people's lives pass by, it all got mixed up in my head with things I've been thinking about for years. That's how songs work sometimes. They take pieces from everywhere and put them together into something new." Dylan gestured to a small group of people gathered nearby. Some were clearly band members, but others looked like industry professionals, dressed in the sort of casual but expensive clothing that marked them as successful players in the music business. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine," Dylan said, leading her toward the group. "This is Marcus Thompson. He runs an independent label in Nashville that specializes in singer-songwriter material. And this is Linda Chen. She's a producer who's worked with some of the most authentic voices in country and folk music." Sarah felt overwhelmed as Dylan made the introductions, explaining to each person something about her background and her writing. She had expected perhaps a brief backstage conversation, not what felt like an impromptu business meeting. "Bob mentioned that you write," Marcus said, his interest clearly genuine. "In this business, we're always looking for authentic voices, people who have something real to say. Would you be willing to play us something?" "Oh, I don't really perform," Sarah stammered. "I just write, and I'm not even sure I'm any good at that." "That's what makes it authentic," Linda said with a smile. "The people who are sure they're good usually aren't. The ones who worry about whether they're good enough are the ones worth listening to." Someone found an acoustic guitar, and after much encouragement, Sarah agreed to play one of her songs, not Highway Ghosts, which felt too personal after Dylan's performance, but another piece called Tuesday Morning, about finding grace in ordinary moments and ordinary work. As Sarah began to sing, her nervousness gradually gave way to the simple pleasure of sharing her work with people who understood what she was trying to accomplish. Her voice was untrained but authentic, carrying the weight of her experience and the honesty of her perspective. The song itself was beautifully crafted, with imagery that painted vivid pictures and a melody that felt both familiar and fresh. When she finished, the backstage area was quiet for a moment. Then Marcus spoke. "Sarah, I'm going to be very direct with you. What you just played is exactly the kind of material we're looking for. Music with substance, with story, with genuine emotion behind it. Would you be interested in coming to Nashville to record a demo? We'd cover all the costs, and there would be no pressure, just a chance to see how your songs sound in a professional studio." Sarah's first instinct was to decline. The practical part of her mind immediately began cataloguing all the reasons why this was impossible. Her job, her responsibilities, her complete lack of experience in the music industry. But another part of her, a part that had been quiet for so long she had almost forgotten it existed, was screaming, "Yes." "I don't know," she said finally. "This is all so unexpected. Yesterday I was serving coffee and wondering if anyone would ever hear my songs. And now you're being offered a chance to find out what might happen if they do," Dylan said gently. "Sarah, I've been in this business for more than 50 years. I've heard thousands of songs by thousands of people, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you have is rare. It's real, it's honest, and it connects with people. Those are the three things that matter most, and you can't teach them or fake them." Linda stepped forward and handed Sarah a business card. "Take some time to think about it," she said, "but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often, and dreams deferred can become dreams denied if we wait too long." As the backstage area began to empty and the equipment trucks loaded up outside, Sarah found herself alone with Dylan for a moment. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why did you do this for me?" Dylan considered the question carefully before answering. "A long time ago, when I was just starting out, I played a gig at a small club in Minneapolis. There was maybe 30 people in the audience, and halfway through my set, most of them were talking over the music or heading for the door. But there was one guy, older fellow sitting in the back, who listened to every word. After the show, he came up and told me he heard something in my songs that reminded him of the music he had loved when he was young. He said I had a responsibility to keep playing, to keep writing, because voices like mine were needed." Dylan paused, looking out toward the empty concert hall. "I never saw that man again, never even got his name. But what he said that night kept me going through a lot of difficult times when I wondered if I was fooling myself about having something worth saying. Tonight, when I listened to your song, I thought maybe it was my turn to be that person for someone else." The drive home gave Sarah 2 hours to process everything that had happened. The business card sat on the passenger seat beside her, tangible proof that the evening hadn't been some elaborate dream. Linda Chen, producer. A Nashville address. A phone number that could connect her to possibilities she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. Back in her small apartment above the hardware store, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open in front of her. For the first time in years, she wasn't writing to pass the time or to quiet the voices in her head, but with the knowledge that someone might actually want to hear what she had to say. The difference was both exhilarating and terrifying. She thought about her father, about the years she had spent caring for him while her dreams waited in the margins of her life. She wondered what he would have thought about this opportunity, whether he would have encouraged her to take it or worried about the risks involved. He had been a practical man, suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true, but he had also been the one who bought her first guitar, who sat through countless living room performances when she was a child. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself moving through her shifts at the diner in a strange state of distraction. She went through the motions of taking orders and serving food, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities and obstacles in equal measure. Several times she caught herself humming melodies while she worked, something she had trained herself not to do years ago when a previous supervisor had complained about the noise. Her co-workers noticed the change in her demeanor. "You seem different lately," observed Helen, the other evening waitress. "Happier, I guess. Did you win the lottery or something?" "Something like that," Sarah replied, not ready to share the details of what felt like such a fragile possibility. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after Bob Dylan had first walked into the diner, Sarah made her decision. She waited until her shift ended, then sat in her car in the parking lot and dialed the number on Linda Chen's business card. "Linda Chen Productions," answered a friendly voice. "Hi, this is Sarah Mitchell. I met Linda at a concert earlier this week, and she asked me to call about possibly making a demo. Sarah! Yes, Linda's been hoping to hear from you. Hold on, let me get her. A moment later, Linda's voice came on the line. Sarah, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about your song all week. Are you ready to take a leap of faith? The arrangements were made with surprising efficiency. Linda would cover Sarah's travel expenses and put her up in Nashville for 4 days. The studio time was already booked for the following month. All Sarah had to do was show up with her songs and her courage. Getting time off from the diner proved easier than expected when Sarah finally worked up the nerve to ask her supervisor. Business had been slow, and they could manage short-staffed for a few days. Her co-workers were curious about her sudden need for vacation time, but Sarah deflected their questions with vague references to family business. The month passed both slowly and quickly, filled with Sarah's preparation for a trip that felt like stepping into another world. She selected her best songs, practiced playing them until her fingers moved automatically across the guitar strings, and tried not to let herself think too much about everything that could go wrong. Nashville in October was beautiful, with autumn colors painting the hills around the city and a crisp energy in the air that seemed to promise new possibilities. Linda met Sarah at the airport, and during the drive to her hotel, they talked about the recording process, about what to expect, and about the realistic possibilities for someone Sarah's age entering the music industry. "I'm not going to lie to you," Linda said, as they navigated the busy streets. "The music business can be brutal, especially for newcomers, but there's also more opportunity now than ever for authentic voices, for people who have something real to say. The internet has changed everything. You don't need a major label deal to find an audience anymore. Sometimes you just need someone to believe in you and help you get started." The recording studio was smaller than Sarah had expected, but filled with equipment that looked both sophisticated and intimidating. The producer Linda had chosen was a soft-spoken man named Tom, who had worked with several successful folk and country artists. He listened to Sarah play through her songs once, made some notes, then began setting up microphones and explaining the process. "We're going to keep this simple," Tom said. "Just you and your guitar, maybe some light accompaniment if it feels right. The goal is to capture what makes your songs special without cluttering them up with production tricks." The first day in the studio was a revelation. Sarah discovered that her songs, which had sounded small and personal when sung alone in her apartment, took on new life and power when recorded with professional equipment. Her voice, which she had always considered adequate at best, had a quality that the microphone seemed to enhance, bringing out the emotional depth and authenticity that had impressed Dylan and his colleagues. By the end of the 4 days, they had recorded 6 songs, including Highway Ghosts and Tuesday Morning, along with 4 others that explored themes of family, responsibility, love, and loss. When Sarah listened to the playback of the final mix, she barely recognized herself. This was music that could stand alongside the songs she had admired for years, music that told stories worth hearing. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked as they wrapped up the session. "Now we see what the world thinks," Linda replied. "I'm going to send this demo to some people I know, radio programmers, other producers, maybe some artists who might be interested in recording one of your songs, and we're going to put together a plan for getting you some live performance experience, starting small but building towards something bigger." The flight home felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. Nashville represented possibility, creativity, the chance to be seen and heard. Home represented responsibility, routine, the comfortable safety of the known. Sarah understood that she would need to find a way to balance both if this opportunity was going to become anything more than an interesting interlude in her otherwise ordinary life. Back at the diner, Sarah slipped into her old routines, but everything felt different now. She had tasted a different kind of life, had heard her own voice coming through speakers with the polish and presence of a professional recording. The knowledge that her demo was circulating somewhere in Nashville, being listened to by people who could change her life, added an undercurrent of excitement to even the most mundane tasks. 3 weeks after her return, Linda called with news. "Sarah, I've been getting some very interesting responses to your demo. There's a folk festival in North Carolina next spring that wants to offer you a slot, and I've had inquiries from 2 different artists about recording Highway Ghosts. But more importantly, there's a small venue in Nashville that books singer-songwriter showcases every month. They want to feature you in January. Are you interested?" Sarah's heart raced at the prospect. A real performance, in front of an audience that came specifically to hear new music. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about as a teenager, but now it came with the weight of adult understanding about what success and failure might mean. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'm interested." The months that followed became a blur of preparation and performance. Sarah began taking weekends off from the diner to drive to small venues within a few hours of home. Coffee shops with open mic nights, small theaters that featured acoustic music, folk clubs that catered to audiences hungry for authentic voices. Each performance built her confidence and honed her skills, teaching her how to connect with audiences and present her songs in the most effective way. The Nashville showcase in January was a milestone. Playing for an audience of industry professionals and serious music fans, Sarah felt for the first time like a real musician rather than someone pretending to be one. Her set was well received, and she made connections that would prove valuable as her career began to take shape. By spring, Sarah had developed a following in the regional folk music scene. Her demo had led to a contract with Marcus Thompson's independent label, and plans were underway for a full album. The folk festival performance in North Carolina drew attention from music journalists and led to features in several magazines that covered the singer-songwriter scene. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came on a quiet Tuesday evening in late spring, almost exactly 1 year after Bob Dylan had first walked into Mel's diner. Sarah was working her regular shift when she noticed a familiar figure sliding into the same corner booth where their conversation had begun. Dylan looked much the same as he had that rainy night. Weathered clothes, unassuming demeanor, the kind of presence that could easily be overlooked by anyone not paying attention. But Sarah was paying attention now, and she could see beyond the surface to the depth of experience and wisdom that had recognized something valuable in her amateur scribblings. "Coffee?" she asked as she approached his table, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please," Dylan replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement at her nervousness. "Black, same as before." As Sarah poured his coffee, her hands trembling slightly from the significance of the moment, Dylan pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket. It was open to a review of her recent album, titled Highway Ghosts and Other Stories, which had been released just 2 weeks earlier. The review was glowing, praising her authentic voice and profound storytelling ability, and comparing her work favorably to some of the most respected names in contemporary folk music. "Congratulations," Dylan said simply. "I knew that first night that you had something special, but this exceeds even what I hoped might happen." Sarah sat down across from him, no longer caring whether her supervisor might disapprove. This conversation was too important to conduct while standing with a coffee pot in her hand. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for what you did, for the opportunity you gave me. You changed my entire life with one evening of kindness." Dylan shook his head. "I didn't change anything. The talent was always there. The songs were already written. All I did was help create an opportunity for the world to hear what you had to say. The hard work, the courage to take risks, the decision to trust that you had something worth sharing, that was all you." They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on the events of the past year. Dylan had continued touring, continuing to write, continuing to search for those moments of human connection that made the endless miles worthwhile. Sarah had balanced her growing music career with her responsibilities at the diner, though she had finally been able to reduce her hours and was planning to make music her full-time focus within the next few months. "There's something I want to ask you," Sarah said as their conversation began to wind down. "That song you played at the concert, the one about people we meet along the way, did you ever record it?" Dylan smiled. "Not yet. I've been thinking it might work better as a duet. Interested?" The offer took Sarah's breath away. The possibility of recording with Bob Dylan, of having her voice joined with one of the most influential artists in popular music history, seemed almost too extraordinary to be real. But then again, this entire year had been filled with moments that seemed too extraordinary to be real. "I would be honored," she said. 6 months later, Sarah found herself back in Nashville, but this time in one of the city's most prestigious recording studios. Dylan had flown in for the session, bringing with him not just the song they had discussed, but several others that he thought might suit her voice and style. The collaboration felt natural, as if they had been making music together for years rather than having met by chance in a roadside diner. The duet version of Highway Ghosts, for that was the title Dylan had given to the song inspired by their first conversation, became a surprise hit, reaching audiences far beyond the folk and singer-songwriter communities where Sarah had initially found her following. The song's themes of dreams deferred but not abandoned, of finding dignity in service to others, of the unexpected ways that lives can intersect and change direction, resonated with listeners who had their own stories of roads not taken and possibilities rediscovered. Sarah's second album, recorded with the confidence and resources that success had brought, expanded her artistic vision while maintaining the authentic voice that had first caught Dylan's attention. Critics praised her growth as a songwriter and performer, noting how she had managed to retain her distinctive perspective while developing greater technical skill and emotional range. The success brought changes to Sarah's life that she was still learning to navigate. She had been able to leave the diner, though she made a point of stopping by regularly to visit with former co-workers and to remember where her journey had begun. She had moved to a small house outside town, with a music room where she could write and practice without worrying about disturbing neighbors. Most importantly, she had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been missing from her life for decades. But perhaps the most significant change was in how she saw herself and her place in the world. No longer was she someone whose dreams had been permanently deferred, whose voice would never be heard beyond the small circle of her daily interactions. She had become someone whose songs mattered to people, whose story of late-blooming success inspired others who had given up on their own creative ambitions. The fan mail she received was filled with letters from people who identified with her journey, middle-aged adults who had set aside artistic dreams for practical considerations, parents who had sacrificed their own ambitions for their children's needs, workers in service industries who felt invisible and undervalued. Many wrote to thank her for showing that it was never too late to pursue authentic self-expression, that creativity and artistry weren't the exclusive province of the young or the formally trained. Sarah made a point of responding personally to as many letters as possible, understanding how meaningful it could be for someone to receive acknowledgement from an artist whose work had touched them. She remembered her own isolation during those long years at the diner, how desperately she had wanted someone to recognize and validate her creative impulses. On the 2-year anniversary of her first meeting with Dylan, Sarah returned to Mel's Diner for a special performance. The venue had been transformed for the evening, with a small stage set up in the main dining room and seating for about 70 people. Tickets had sold out within hours of being announced, with fans traveling from several states to attend this intimate show in the place where Sarah's professional music career had begun. Dylan made a surprise appearance, joining Sarah on stage for their duet and for several of his own songs. But the most powerful moment of the evening came when Sarah performed alone, playing Tuesday morning for an audience that included several of her former co-workers and regular customers from her waitressing days. "This song," she said before beginning to play, "is about finding grace in ordinary work and ordinary days. It's about the dignity of service and the unexpected ways that routine can become sacred if we pay attention to what we're really doing and why we're doing it." I wrote it during a 15-minute break between the dinner rush and the evening cleanup, sitting in the same spot where I used to eat my meals and wonder if anyone would ever care about the songs I was writing. As she played, Sarah could see tears in the eyes of several audience members who understood exactly what she was talking about. The challenge of maintaining hope and creativity while meeting the demands of daily responsibility. The way that service to others could become a form of prayer if approached with the right spirit. After the performance, as Sarah mingled with the audience and signed copies of her albums, she was approached by a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s. "Ms. Mitchell," the woman said nervously, "I work at the truck stop out on Highway 9, and I write songs too. I know this might sound crazy, but would you maybe look at some of my work sometime? I mean, I know you're busy and successful now, but I thought maybe—" Sarah smiled, remembering her own nervousness when she had first shared her notebook with Dylan. "What's your name?" "Emma," the young woman replied. "Emma, I would be delighted to look at your songs. And it doesn't sound crazy at all. It sounds like the most natural thing in the world. Here's my card. Send me some of your work, or better yet, come to my next show in the area and we can talk afterward." As Sarah handed Emma her business card, she felt the completion of a circle that had begun with Dylan's unexpected kindness to her. The responsibility of success, she was learning, included the obligation to extend the same opportunities to others that had been extended to her. The evening wound down with Sarah and Dylan sharing a quiet conversation in the diner's kitchen, the same space where she had once taken her breaks and written her songs in stolen moments between shifts. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. How far she had traveled while, in another sense, ending up exactly where she belonged. "Do you ever regret it?" Dylan asked. "The years you spent here? The dreams that got put on hold?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I used to," she said finally, "but not anymore. Those years weren't wasted. They gave me something to write about, something authentic to draw from. The songs I'm writing now couldn't have been written by the 20-year-old who wanted to run away to Nashville. They needed to be written by someone who had lived through responsibility and sacrifice and loss, someone who understood that dreams don't always unfold according to our timeline, but can still come true if we don't give up on them entirely." As they prepared to leave the diner for what might be the last time as anything other than customers, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The success was gratifying, the recognition was meaningful, but what mattered most was the knowledge that she had found her voice and learned to use it in service of something larger than herself. Her songs were now part of the soundtrack to other people's lives, providing comfort to the lonely, inspiration to the discouraged, and validation to anyone who had ever felt invisible or undervalued. She had become part of the long tradition of American music that celebrated ordinary people and ordinary experiences, that found the universal in the specific and the sacred in the mundane. The drive home took her past the highway, where she had watched headlights for so many years, wondering about the lives of the people behind them. Now she understood that each set of lights represented someone with their own dreams, their own struggles, their own capacity for resilience and reinvention. Her music had taught her that no one story was ordinary, that everyone carried songs within them if they could find the courage to listen and the words to express what they heard. In the years that followed, Sarah's career continued to flourish. She released several more albums, each one expanding her artistic range while maintaining the authentic voice that had first caught Dylan's attention. She toured regularly but selectively, preferring smaller venues where she could maintain the intimate connection with audiences that made her performances special. She also became known as a mentor to other late-blooming artists, people who had discovered or rediscovered their creative voices later in life. Through workshops, collaborations, and simple acts of encouragement, she passed along the gift that Dylan had given her, the recognition that talent and authenticity mattered more than age or conventional career trajectories. Sarah's story became part of music industry lore, frequently cited as an example of how genuine artistry could still find an audience in an increasingly commercialized marketplace. But for Sarah herself, the most meaningful measure of success was the letters and emails she continued to receive from people who had been touched by her music and her story. A retired schoolteacher wrote to say that Sarah's songs had inspired her to finally write the novel she had been planning for 30 years. A single father reported that listening to Sarah's music during his long commute helped him process the challenges of raising his children alone while working 2 jobs to support them. A woman in her 60s shared that Sarah's example had given her the courage to enroll in art classes and begin painting again after a 40-year hiatus. These connections between her music and the lives of people she would probably never meet represented the true purpose of what she was doing. Art, she had learned, was not primarily about self-expression, but about creating bridges between human experiences, helping people feel less alone in their struggles and more hopeful about their possibilities. On a quiet evening in late fall, exactly 5 years after her first meeting with Dylan, Sarah sat in her music room working on a new song. Outside her window, she could see the lights of the interstate in the distance, the same highway that had inspired Highway Ghosts and so many of her other compositions. But now, instead of feeling like an observer watching other people's lives pass by, she felt like a participant in the great human conversation that art made possible. Her songs were traveling those same highways, carried in the hearts and minds of people who had found something meaningful in her words and melodies. She thought about the 20-year-old version of herself who had planned to conquer Nashville through determination and ambition alone. That young woman had possessed talent and dreams, but lacked the life experience and emotional depth that would eventually make her songs matter to people beyond herself. The circuitous route her career had taken, through years of responsibility and sacrifice, through chance meetings and unexpected opportunities, had ultimately led to something more meaningful than early success might have provided. As she worked on the new song, Sarah found herself humming a melody that seemed to capture everything she had learned about the relationship between dreams and reality, between ambition and service, between the life we plan and the life we actually live. The words came slowly but surely, telling the story of a woman who thought she had missed her chance, but discovered that sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as ordinary moments, that sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we almost overlook. When the song was finished, Sarah played it through several times, making small adjustments to the melody and refining the lyrics until they said exactly what she wanted them to say. Then she picked up her phone and called Dylan's number, a contact she had treasured but used sparingly over the years. "Bob," she said when he answered, "I just finished a new song, and I think you might like to hear it. It's called The Stranger in the Corner Booth, and it's about how angels sometimes show up looking like ordinary people, and how the most important conversations of our lives can happen when we least expect them." Dylan's laughter came through the phone line, warm and familiar. "I'd love to hear it," he said. "And Sarah, thank you for writing it. The world needs more songs about paying attention to the people and moments that matter. That's what real music is supposed to do." As Sarah began to play her new song over the phone, sharing it with the person who had made her career possible, she reflected on how perfectly this moment encapsulated everything she had learned about music and life and the connections between them. Music, she now understood, was not about individual achievement or personal recognition, though those things had their place. Music was about creating moments like this one, intimate exchanges of human experience, bridges built from melody and words that connected one heart to another across whatever distances separated them. The song told the story of their first meeting from her perspective, but it also told the larger story of how grace works in the world, how kindness ripples outward in ways we can never fully predict or control, how the simple act of seeing and acknowledging another person's worth can change the trajectory of their entire life. When she finished playing, there was a moment of silence on the line. Then Dylan spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, that may be the most beautiful thank you note ever written. And it's not just a thank you, it's a reminder to all of us to keep our eyes open for those moments when we can make a difference in someone else's life, when we can be the stranger in the corner booth who changes everything." After they hung up, Sarah sat quietly in her music room, surrounded by the instruments and equipment that had become the tools of her trade. Through the window, she could see those distant highway lights, no longer symbols of lives passing her by, but reminders of all the connections that were possible, all the stories waiting to be told, all the songs waiting to be written. She thought about Emma, the young woman from the truck stop who had approached her after the anniversary concert. Their correspondence had led to a mentorship that was now blossoming into a genuine friendship and musical collaboration. Emma's songs showed the same raw authenticity that Sarah remembered from her own early work, the same hunger to transform personal experience into something universal and meaningful. The cycle was continuing, as it always did, kindness creating opportunity, opportunity creating growth, growth creating the capacity for greater kindness. Music serving as the medium through which these transformations occurred, connecting people across generations and circumstances, reminding everyone involved that their stories mattered and their voices deserved to be heard. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the success she had achieved, but for the journey that had brought her to it. Every difficult year at the diner, every dream deferred, every moment of doubt and discouragement had been necessary preparation for what was to come. Without those experiences, she would never have had anything worth singing about. The last thing she did before turning out the lights was to add a line to the notebook she still carried, the same one that had contained "Highway Ghosts" when Dylan first read it. The new line would eventually become part of another song, but for now it was simply a personal reminder of the lesson that had shaped her life. Sometimes the person you're meant to become is waiting on the other side of the life you think you're supposed to live. Outside her window, the highway lights continued their eternal dance, carrying travelers toward destinations known and unknown, past and future, dreams realized and dreams still waiting to unfold. And in her small house beside that highway, Sarah Mitchell slept peacefully, knowing that she had found her place in the great song that connects all human stories, all human hopes, all human hearts. The music played on. In life, we often encounter people who seem ordinary, unremarkable, just passing through our daily routines. But sometimes, if we take the time to really see them, to listen to their stories and recognize their worth, we discover that they carry within them gifts that the world desperately needs to hear. Sarah Mitchell's story reminds us that it's never too late to pursue our dreams, that authentic voices matter regardless of age or circumstance, and that sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we almost overlook. Bob Dylan's kindness to a small-town waitress created ripples that continue to spread, touching the lives of everyone who has heard Sarah's music and been inspired by her story. Never underestimate the power of recognition, the value of encouragement, or the impact of taking time to truly see the person behind the uniform, behind the ordinary facade, behind the circumstances that might cause us to look past them. In a world that often seems to value only youth, glamour, and immediate success, Sarah's journey stands as testament to the enduring power of authentic artistry and human connection. The person serving your coffee might be carrying songs that could change your life. The individual working behind the counter might have stories that could transform how you see the world. The stranger in the corner booth might be exactly the person you need to meet, or the person who needs to meet you. Keep your eyes open. Keep your heart open. You never know when you might encounter your own highway ghost or become someone else's guardian angel disguised as an ordinary person going about their ordinary day. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories, and share in the comments below about a time when someone saw potential in you that you didn't see in yourself, or when you were able to offer encouragement to someone whose talent was hidden beneath their circumstances. Music, kindness, and human connection are the forces that make life worth living. Let's keep them alive in our world.